Hello, welcome to today's HR Huddle, last day of February. We hope you are all doing well. Thanks, Jen, for joining me today. We thought we would take today and talk about this newest generation that's been entering our workforce for the last few years, Gen Z. And we've been doing some reading and writing about it. We've been being asked about it by leaders and HR professionals. They're talking about it at church. I mean, I think everywhere we go, people are talking about this next gen and doing some comparison to millennials. Millennials are comparing themselves to Gen Z, and millennials kind of split themselves. So that's interesting. And we just think from a talent perspective and a leadership perspective that we should be paying attention to this next gen that is in our workforce and what they're bringing to the workforce, some of the differences, some of the similarities, and just really get to know them. We've been talking on this HR Huddle and many other places about this idea of belonging. And, we want to make sure that we are learning about this next gen. We are, listening and, reading and out on TikTok and watching, all the different places that they are that we might not be. And so they're going to be, impacting our culture. They're going to be impacting the way we do work. They're going to be impacting the kind of work that we're doing and how they do work. I mean, all of it. And so we saw that with the millennials. We see it with every single generation. And here comes another one. So we thought it was important for us to stop and talk about it, make sure everybody's paying attention to it. So that's the reason that, we're here. Jen, is there anything you'd add to the reason or big picture of why this is important?
Well, I posted an article this past week about, Gen Z and how, some people in the workplace are afraid of them. New York Times article. I thought it was so fascinating and awesome. And it just struck me that there's a lot to be learned and known about this group of folks, oldest of which is 25, let's say, 24, 25, right in there. And those are the cusp, leading edge Gen Zs. And we're seeing, all our college graduates, everybody joining out of school now, they're all going to be Gen Z for a while. We don't know when that cohort will shift or when they'll end it. And I guess we'll go to generation AA or something. We'll be at the end of the alphabet, or they'll come up with some other way of tagging them. But, I think it's super important to understand this just so that we're paying attention to the kind of messaging we're doing from a talent perspective. We also have to be careful we don't stereotype people. Tamera and I were talking before we started this stream today, and the age of the parents that are raising these kids actually affects the way that they show up and what generation they sort of mimic or mirror. Younger parent Gen Zs might be different than older parent Gen Zs, and so obviously gender, socioeconomic status,
personality, religious background,
where I grew up, so many things affect us, right? So we always have to be careful when we're learning these things that we aren't going to just throw people then into these stereotypical buckets and not allow them to show up as who they are and be the way that they're going to be. But it is interesting when you're thinking about HR programs, you're thinking about HR communications and messaging and various ways that you're trying to engage people to think about some of these possible global differences and similarities. In particular, I think we plan to compare and contrast Gen Z from the millennials, the Gen Y before them. So,
well, let's start there. So right now, they're still defining Gen Z ages, but as Jen alluded to, it's about 1997 to 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. Give or take a year or two on either side, and it fluctuates depending on who you read, but it's right in there. And one of the ways that they're being defined, the Gen Z is being defined, is they are post 9/11. Now in that year, 2001, there's a few that were, alive during the 9/11, but they don't remember it. It's a history lesson for them in school. And so you can kind of think about that as a frame of reference. And then the millennials are 1980 to 2000. So right in there. And yes, Jen. Okay. I just saw you like thinking about it. So I wanted
Yeah, I mean, depending on what reference you're reading, it's somewhere between 1980 and 1982.
yeah.
So yep.
Yep, right in there. So just to give you a sense, of what those ages are. So let's start with some of the comparisons between the millennials and the Gen Z. And I think the first most people point to is digitally native. And Gen Z was like born with their phones and computers. My and he's not a Gen Z, but my 18-month-old grandson has his own little laptop. He got a little laptop for Christmas. And Gen Z, that's how his mom, who's right on the edge of Gen Z there, she's the oldest Gen Z, depending on how you frame it. She has a little bit of millennial characteristics, but that's how they were raised. That's what they're known. The kids in school, it's done on the iPad. Everything is digital. Their communication with all their friends is digital. How they use digital is a little bit different because one of the differences is Gen Z is more private than millennials. Millennials, post everything, share everything. Nothing is off limits. And Gen Z seems to be more reserved and wants to use more private applications, like Snapchat or, other applications like that. And so, but digitally native, they expect everything to be digital. They expect from a workplace perspective, what that means then is if we're not digital, if we're not top notch, using the best technology, fast technology to be efficient and work smarter and not harder. Both of those generations, look at the older generations and will roll their eyes and probably walk out the door at some point. So I think that's one big one that is a commonality between them.
Yeah. And I would say, Tamera, that in addition to sort of being digitally native, they both see technology as part of or an extension of self versus those of us in older generations, which might have seen technology as a means to an end or a tool to
Right.
use for work or, most of us have become addicted to our mobile phones. So they do feel like they're embedded, but sorry. I think that's part of it. I think
Yes,
that
I agree.
that idea that it's an extension of self. And as a result, firms have to provide the latest technology. Maybe you want to mention, a firm that we talked to recently and, what they were doing for their interns.
Yeah,
Technology.
so we were doing some strategic planning with a firm, and one of the things it was a cross representation of different generations, different service lines, industries, operations team members, and so we were just like envisioning the future of the firm, and we were talking about technology, and somewhere in the conversation it came up that there was a closet with the rotation of the used laptops that would go to the interns, and I had to stop. I happened to be facilitating at the time and say, wait a minute, I have to back up. Tell me again what you just said. And our most digitally native, they grew up with it. It's going to be like embedded in the palm of their hands here pretty soon. We are making our first impression with these interns. They go back to school and talk about their experience with the firms. They have to have a positive, current experience, and it's and the cost of technology has come down so much, and so there's other ways to use and recycle laptops or technology and backup and those kinds of things, or if I need one for travel or whatever it might be. But we were like, please have your interns and your first year staff have good best technology. And so that's an example of kind of the thinking that we need to be paying attention to with these generations, and how we can impact that from a talent and a employee experience, frankly, and keep in mind they are talking about it. They are snapping a picture of their laptop that they got that is however many years old and saying my first day at work, or putting it on TikTok or whatever it might be. And we can shudder about it, we can tisk about it, roll our eyes about it, but it doesn't matter. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, and they want to keep up with the Joneses, right? They're going to want the best technology so they can show that they're as cool as their peers, and that they have the latest iPhone and the latest laptops and the highest speed and the smartest technology possible. Another similarity between our Ys, our millennials, and our Zs is going to be the desire for flexibility. And so flex messages, remote work. Now, there's a little nuanced difference between them. And a lot of people don't realize this about Gen Z, but Gen Z want digital communications, and they're very adept and very skilled at using digital, but they also like in person and face to face and live discourse more maybe than their millennial sisters and brothers. But they all want workplace flexibility. They want, access to programs that allow them to work remotely sometimes or all the time. And of course, the technology to enable that at high speeds. And they want flexible schedules. And they're going to be asking about it all the time. It's going to be a very high on their list as an employer. And we have to have good answers and, the right sort of programs available to both generations as appeals. Now, you could say, well, hey, I'm Gen X or I'm baby boomer and I want flexibility too. Yes, I think it's something that most of us can say is become like a have to have,
Right.
In our lives.
Well, and Gen Z came off the pandemic, a year at least online school and getting work done whenever they can because everybody's home situation was different. So they are truly used to anytime, anywhere work, from a schoolwork perspective, and or their brand new job was starting in 2020. We keep hearing that in the senior programs that we're leading. I started in 2020. And so they've had to figure out how to do this. It's become part of, what it is. And I think tied to that flexibility and that, communication and also, the idea of technology is collaboration is important to both millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z. And they very much want to, solve problems together. They want to be work in groups and teams. They're used to that. How they do it might be a little bit different. And I think if you start to really have conversations with Gen Z, they are way more open, perhaps, than older generations about okay with different views. And they think that's a good thing and a positive thing versus there's a right and a wrong. Millennials might approach it a little bit more right and wrong, and maybe some of the older generations do. But that collaboration, very important to both the millennials and Gen Z. So that's another similarity that we see.
Yeah, I love it. I would say that there's another thing that maybe Gen Z has more than any of the other prior generations. And so this might be a difference. I don't know if it's a hard, fast difference between millennials and Zs, but I know Zs, it's probably going to be their hallmark. That's my prediction here. I'm going to say it. They are committed to diversity.
100%.
Yeah, just
yes,
majorly committed to diversity. And DE and I, or, and justice, and, any and you can put on DE and I and everything else. They are going to care mightily about an organization stance related to diversity. I just saw kind of a sad LinkedIn poll. I participated in the poll. Somebody in my feed, that was asking, did we think, the poll was, do you think that there should be gender neutral restrooms offered in workplaces? And, I said, yes, I do think so. And I was, one of like 38% or something that said yes, and 60 some percent said no. And I was so bummed. I even wrote afterwards at the bottom of the poll, I'm so sad about this. I think this is awful. Of course we have to have gender neutral restrooms for clients and team members. Now, did I mean gender neutral only? I mean, maybe you have a men's room and a woman's room and then some gender neutral rooms, but like I was blown away that LinkedIn, the people inside this person's feed were negative about that. I don't think if that was all Gen Z is voting that we would have seen anything else but 100% yes. So That's just something we have to recognize. They are more diverse to begin with.
Right.
Their racial identities, their gender identities, they are going to be infinitely more diverse than prior generations. And as a result, they will value that and expect it from their employers.
Well, and they expect it from their employers, for their employers to say, if we value diversity, that we're demonstrating it, that we're walking the talk. And they really, look for that both in employers, in companies they purchase from, and they do their research, at least 7 digital sources. So we got to pay attention to that. But they're looking to see if it's aligned and it's mapped. And tied to that, I think, Jen, is Gen Z expects their workplace to take a stand on social issues. And I know that's been controversial. And, we've helped some firms navigate that, in 2020 and, just all kinds of different issues that have come up, over the last few years, and moving in that direction. We've taken a stand on several issues, but Gen Z expects you to take a stand, and they expect their workplace to take a stand. That is very important to them. And that's, part of the transparency, and that's, part of just that whole diversity and inclusiveness, and, everybody, is important, and they very, very much, value that. And part of that is tied to, I think, since we're talking about differences now, another, I think, unique thing that is shaping Gen Z is their unique identification. They want to, be seen as unique for themselves. And so part of that, they're defining, based on their social commitments, sexual identity and orientation, how they are defining themselves, at work, and, names and labels. And, they don't subscribe to that as much as prior generations. And so, figuring out what that identity is something that is very important to Gen Z.
Yeah. And I just mentioned it related to restrooms, but clothing, there's a whole bunch of other things that are starting to just sort of lose their association as one versus the other. And, so conformity, we have to be careful expecting some sort of conformity. Back in the day, not very long ago, pre-pandemic, but right before it, we were spending a lot of time talking to firms about dress for your day, and getting in arguments about, whether women should wear closed-toed shoes, and whether they should have nylons on, and if they're wearing a skirt, and, like stuff like that. And we were like, oh my gosh, you can't legislate this stuff anymore. This is not, they have to dress for the environment they're going to, and they have to dress in the way that expresses themselves, and anyway, it's just going to be it's going to be a whole new place for HR to manage this identity issue. There are some statistics that show that up to 20% of Gen Z do not identify as male or female.
Right.
To a fifth. Now, I'm not, that's just one statistic, one data point that I have read. I don't know if it's, proven by many studies or any of that. And I know for some that's alarming. It is what it is. And we have to be loving and accepting and figure out what our program's going to be to manage people and meet them where they are,
right,
and who they are.
Right.
So that diversity is pretty critical. We're talking about other differences, and one of them is that, there was a lot of talk back in the, teaching about millennials. We did a ton of teaching about millennials, let's say, for the last decade, and a lot of conversation about it. They all want a trophy, and they all want to be told good job and not given any feedback, and everything's got to be kudos, and, they have to be propped up. And I don't know if any of that's, that's a little dramatic way of saying that they prefer and need a decent amount of positive reinforcement, maybe. And we could just basically say that the parents and the educators around millennials created that, so, we definitely have to spend more time acknowledging people and giving them positive feedback. Well, it turns out the studies are showing that the Gen Z, they want feedback also. So they both are the same, and like, I want a feedback rich environment. But Gen Zs are like, I'd like it direct. I'd like it straight talk me,
Right.
And they're willing to hear, or in fact, maybe suspicious if they don't
Right.
hear some things that could be improved.
Well, and they're willing to give it also, Jen. I mean, and that's the generation that we've raised. We have a couple of them.
Yeah, I know. I'm 100% responsible for 3 of them. I'm super sorry about it, but yes, they will give you feedback.
We may have raised a couple of them. And so in addition to them just like, being straight and saying it the way it is, they're going to say it straight right back. And that's one of the things we talked about, with the millennials a little bit was, not as much hierarchy. It's like flat with Gen Z. It's, the collaboration, and that's part of it is it's the collaborative nature, but also they can talk to anybody anywhere in the world, and they're used to having that access. And so to come into a workplace and not having that access, or it's not their place, they're like, you're kidding me, because I can go do that on social media and I can talk to CEOs and presidents and people, in Uganda or whatever it might be. And they use it also, more for solving problems and social causes and things like that than it is, this hierarchy or, so much of a passage of information. Yes, it's that, but it's that collaboration. So they expect a similar dynamic in their workplaces, which is super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it'll turn the town hall on its ear. And it should, I mean, as a leader, we should be always inviting open, direct feedback. We should recognize that there will be objections raised. Of course, there's a time and a place for some, super personal feedback that should be private and that sort of thing. And we're going to have to figure out how to manage norms, but the norms are going to change. And we can't stand on old, what I'm going to call political principles,
Right.
And get, aghast or offended or, other reactions as workplace employers when our Gen Zs ask direct questions or raise tough feedback about their perceptions about our organization or our policies or our programs or our clients or whatever it may be. And, if we're really honest with ourselves, having somebody point out spinach in our teeth is a good idea. It's a gift. It's a show of respect and care and concern for our well-being. So we have to sort of let go of those political feelings of like, wow, I just, don't make me look bad here. We'll have to give that up and start like embracing the idea that this next generation is going to be more willing to engage in a public setting or a private setting with higher ups on things that they think need to change. And there's so much that needs to change in our profession, in our world, that I am encouraged with the idea that they would be so forward with their ideas and so committed to the things they think need to happen that we might actually solve some of these things or innovate and implement some cool ideas because of their guts.
Right. I'm going to wrap up on one more. I know we're about at time here, but you just hit on it. And I think it's important, especially from our HR professionals and leadership to know is this idea of, self-care and making sure that they're taking care of themselves and mental health. And we've been talking about that with the pandemic. But again, it's at a whole new level with Gen Z. They value it. And they value making sure that employers, think it's important. They have no hesitation to take a mental health day or, just make sure that they're taking care of themselves. Millennials have valued experiences. That's one of the things that kind of defines them as the experiences, which is a healthy thing to do. But the Gen Z you might see popping up, asking for days or time off, or how are we, taking care of ourselves as individuals. And that is something that is important to them. And they expect their workplace, again, to be paying attention to it, to, validate its importance, to have programs around it, support that time off, those kinds of things. So, you said those words, Jen, and I think again, from an HR and leadership perspective, I think it's important to know that, again, going in, with Gen Z as we're hiring Gen Z.
I haven't read the statistic, Tamara. I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But I'll bet you that the Gen Z is a very high percentage have had counseling, and
Hmm.
some sort of
That's
counseling.
interesting. Yeah. It's
Or
just part of what they've, yes.
counseling or coaching, and I don't mean sports coaching.
Right.
So I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out to be a higher percentage than prior generations. I think that their families have gotten them more help,
Yes.
Especially to deal with some of these, the challenging issues that we've been facing during
Yes.
the pandemic. And so I just wouldn't be surprised. I agree with you 100%. Self-care and health care, mental health,
Yep.
things that create wellness in the work community are going to be important for them, for sure.
Yep. And we'll keep you posted more as we learn. We'd love to hear what, any statistics or, good resources that you have or what you've seen with your Gen Z group that's coming up. So we'd love to have a two-way dialogue with you. So I know we'll be continuing this. And in the meantime, we hope this was helpful and look forward to hearing from you. Have a great rest of your week. And we will plan on seeing you next Monday on next Monday's HR Huddle. So thanks for being with us today.
Bye all.